I still have a voice at this time of day. Hey guys, how you doing? It's Jawad with Hit the Apex podcast. Thank you for joining me on this Australian Grand Prix preview edition. I will say up front that my voice breaking has nothing to do with any feverish conditions or having a cough. No, I'm absolutely fine. Touch wood. Touching a lot of wood here. My desk, my noggin. Because, we are heading into the unknown this weekend with the Australian Grand Prix. Of course, I will be there. We've already had three team personnel going to self-quarantine. So, yeah, it's going to be an interesting weekend. Lots being talked about. Yeah, such strange times we're living in at the moment, I guess. It's hard to put my finger on it. I ended up getting some toilet paper too. I was running out about this time last week, and I'm like, well, what am I going to do when there's nothing on the shelves because everyone's running around like lunatics trying to stock up for the apocalypse or whatever, which, as I said last week, toilet paper's the last thing I would want to stock up on if the world was about to end. I said, I'd probably go to the bottle shop, get some snacks, throw a bunch of meat in the freezer as well if I can. And basically just, have access to my internet, and that's it, or if not internet, I've got heaps of records here, I've got heaps of CDs, a lot of content, that could easily see us through. So, yeah. Anyway, sorry for starting on a bit of a somber note. Just thought I'd get that out of the way. We'll talk a bit about coronavirus throughout this podcast, as it is, I'm not going to say wreaking havoc as much as it is causing a nuisance across the world at the moment. MotoGP again has, last week I said, well, they've cancelled the Qatar Grand Prix for MotoGP class. The Thai Grand Prix, which was going to be the second round, was postponed altogether till later in the year. And we were all hoping the new season would start in Texas at the Circuit of the Americas, but that won't be happening because last night they announced that because of the state of emergency in the state of Texas or city of Austin, that they've had to postpone that too. So that'll be held now later in the year, most likely November. I think they've actually released the rescheduled date, but I haven't had a chance to look at it. Been busy trying to do other stuff, chiefly organise, what's going on this weekend for me as well. But good news is I will be at the Grand Prix, so keep eyes on our social media feeds as well. Hit the Apex Media on Twitter to see what's going on. And then, of course, if you follow me on my Instagram as well, you'll be able to check out my Insta stories. I'll have some photos up as well, hopefully. So, yeah, that's current state of affairs. It will get mentioned a couple more times in this episode. Gotta say, everyone, best thing you can do, wash your bloody hands. Wash your hands. Do simple things. Keep things tidy. Hygiene. I'm glad that, they're taking not drastic measures because I'm normally a pretty clean person, but, at the Grand Prix itself, they're going to have hand sanitizing stations everywhere. It'd be a miracle if the public toilets there are kept clean. Not for the lack of the cleaning staff trying to keep them tidy. It's just the punters always make a mess in there. So, and I had a friend tell me this horrific story from Earthcore Festival a while ago about walking into one of the toilets and seeing not what was, in front of him or below. It was more what was on the roof, so above him. I'm not going to elaborate there. I think your imaginations can probably do the thinking and figure out what I'm talking about. And I know I'm going a bit off track. There's a lot to talk about anyway this week, and I'll see how long my voice will last too. Going to have to rest that ahead of the weekend. But yeah, so that's that. Get some things off the top of my head, some thoughts initially. If you want to ask the question about whether we should be letting this event run and everything, in an ideal world or realistically, you'd say, or for the sake of everyone's sanity, you'd probably say no. But given that, there's been so much there's always so much preparation that goes into the race in Melbourne. You know, it's done in a public place. It's not at a standalone circuit. You know, it's a public roads that are converted into a racetrack. Many months of preparation go into it. You know, it's a big build, and then of course the de-rigging of it as well afterwards takes almost as much time. But also, it's kind of the spectators that make this event. You know, I know it's no. Some people will say, well, that's no excuse, you know, because everyone's safety needs to come first, and I agree with that. But I'm sure there's fans out there who would be disappointed that, you know, they won't get to engage with their drivers this year because they've restricted the driver engagement between fans and between them and the fans. You know, there's no autograph sessions this year. Instead, there'll be like a Q&A session, even at the Melbourne Walk, which is a popular item at the Grand Prix. I've talked about it every year, basically, of how cool it is to see drivers be able to get this close to the fans. You know, I was a part of it as well many years ago when I was going in a fan capacity, getting selfies and signatures and all that sort of thing. So the fact that, you know, there won't be much interaction or any interaction there either is kind of sad, and I'm sure a lot of fans will be disappointed about that. You know, the ones who, you know, 12 months ago they were rebooking their tickets for this year, or they were buying tickets to say, oh look, I'm going to come to the Melbourne Grand Prix for the first time. You know, I'm sure those, you know, people will still be attending and everything, but at the same time, just exercising caution. Wash your hands. That's my public service announcement, you could say, for this podcast, is just wash your hands. Now, that's it. That's all for this week. I'll see you guys next time. No, yeah, of course not. I wouldn't leave you without going over all the content that I have, and yeah, quite a bit of it too. I said last week after the testing wrap that I would sort of do a preview for the season ahead, you know, just to kind of a overview of what's to come, you know, what I would like to see, what I think will happen. Potentially I'll drop a prediction about who will win the championship. I mean, I'm not big on that sort of stuff because I'm never right anyway, or I could be boring and just say what's blatantly obvious. You know, I'm sure everyone will everyone will feel the same way about it as well, given that we're pretty much, it's a continuation of the rules that we had last year, you know, the regulations from 2019. Most teams have just, you know, upgraded their cars from last year or created an evolution spec, you know, rather than do something revolutionary. So overall, as I said from testing last week, the pecking order should still be the same, but where, you know, the unknown lies is that there's this expectation that we're going to see Ferrari and Red Bull challenge Mercedes for the championship. We were going to have this three-way title fight, but there's a great unknown about that because, you know, Ferrari at testing, they were saying, oh, we got no pace, you know, it's genuine, we are not making up rubbish or whatever, you know. So it's like, okay, so do we remove them from the equation altogether? And then Red Bull, you know, they put in a lot of laps, they had one of the most reliable pre-seasons that they've had in many years, you know, basically since the turn of the era, when we got into the hybrid turbo era. But the question is whether they can actually hit the ground running. You know, they've got to show up in Melbourne this weekend and, you know, if not win the race, you know, which could be possible, we'll talk about in the Grand Prix preview, but, you know, be on the podium, be, you know, within that crucial couple of tenths of Mercedes in qualifying. You know, it's all about that, you know, having the pace there, because, you know, Mercedes, they don't make mistakes, or they very rarely make mistakes. You know, Lewis Hamilton this year gunning for 7 world titles, 91 race wins, which, you know, I mean, about a decade ago we wouldn't have thought that that was possible, or when even in 2004 when Michael Schumacher did reach those heights, reach those tallies, and, you know, basically rewrote the rule book. We didn't think for probably not even a decade, but maybe even several decades, that we would see those records beaten. You know, obviously Juan Manuel Fangio was the most, you know, has won the most championships before him, you know, 5 world titles. And now there's 3 in that group. You know, Lewis Hamilton has gone past Fangio with 6. Now he's within 1 of equaling Michael's record. So, you know, how's that going to play out for him this year? That's the main thing, and I think he's the guy to beat. Mercedes have come up with another solid car, it seems, from testing, and he doesn't look like he's slowing down. He's still on it, and as much as he says, that, the records and stuff is not really on his mind, I'm sure, once it's all achieved and when he does it, because it's not a matter of if, it's not a matter of if, but when, I mean, if it's not this year, it could easily be next year, the year after, however long Lewis decides to continue racing for. So, that if factor is no longer part of the equation. It's going to happen. It's a matter of when. And you know what? For all intents and purposes, it could be this year, because the onus is more on his rivals, I think, to actually show up to the table to take him down. I've already said Ferrari, Red Bull, their pre-season. You'd be thinking that Red Bull will be putting all of its eggs into the Verstappen basket. He's been solid over the last couple of years, but just hasn't been able to string together a whole season worth of a title fight, sustain a title challenge. And that's not of his own doing. That's basically because the team hasn't shown up, at times with the right car to be able to do it. So while Max is on there and he's continuing to mature as a driver and make less mistakes, who knows about this year though, because his best mate Esteban Ocon's on the grid, so he'll probably want to stay clear of that Renault if he wants to win the championship. But, I'm sure Mercedes might even or Toto Wolff will give a phone call down the pit lane to his old reserve driver and Esteban and say, oh, well, can you help us out here, mate? Maybe get in the way or hold up Max, similar to what happened to Fernando Alonso in Abu Dhabi 2010, even though that wasn't, of Red Bull's doing, but it was quite funny that, his title challenge just went up in disappointment, basically being stuck behind the Renault of Vitaly Petrov. Key factor in all this is that there were Renaults involved in both those incidents. So, what does that say? I don't know. I wouldn't read into it too much. So, yeah, it's up to Max to be able to sustain a challenge and Red Bull to give him the platform to do so. Honda have become more reliable as a power unit supplier in the last year. Their hope this year is to maybe not even take any engine penalties at all, because, they've had to change. You're only limited to 3 power units per season. This year, I think they've added one of the MGU components, an extra component, because there was 2 previously. Now there's 3. So, with extra reliability, I'm sure it will stop them from having to undertake those changes and bringing in extra units, while having the speed, reliability in there will make sure that they are able to challenge Mercedes. Ferrari, look, Ferrari is Ferrari. You kind of have to accept that, you can't be too disappointed if they don't win the championship, or they're not there. You can be disappointed if they go backwards from last year. That would be a huge step. And there's still that whole thing up in the air about their engine from last year and whether, it was because of that they were getting the advantage in qualifying, and then also the 3 races they won. That goes up in the air too. And then you look at 2 of those races are on power dominant circuits, the most power dominant circuits on the calendar being Spa and Monza. So, that's still up in the air, and I'm sure over the weekend we'll hear more from, whether teams are going to protest or, launch some kind of legal action. The FIA did respond to that statement last week that the teams issued all together in unison, saying that the FIA has every right to, Ferrari's confidentiality, and when they worded it that way, I think, it's like any organisation, if there is some kind of HR matter going on or some kind of private settlement being negotiated, they can do it behind closed doors, and, confidentiality is the term that is thrown around a lot. But at the same time, I understand why the teams are miffed about this, because, in a sport with so top of the table as F1, with so much money involved, so much innovation and whatnot involved, transparency, would be really good between all the parties, given that it's so competitive. So yeah, it's a double-edged sword, I guess, in that. But at the same time, I said it last week when I suggested, well, if they haven't done anything wrong, Ferrari, then they should come out and let everyone know. That would be the nice thing to do. But even if they had done something wrong, you would want to know too, because then it's like, well, that means we can protest the result of 3 races or all those pole positions. It could potentially change, the point standings from last year. But, there's no time like the present, I guess, so we'll keep it in the now. Ferrari, a couple of things to look out for though this year with them is the driver dynamic. It did get a bit frosty last year on track only, I got to say, because in the Netflix show it seemed like they were pretty peachy, those two, Charles Leclerc and Sebastian Vettel, to the point where they were even encouraged to kiss each other if they have to. I don't think they'll be able to do that this weekend too, because the press release in regards to minimising driver contact also suggests, no kissing or shaking hands or hugging, cuddling. Even if you want to spoon, you can't spoon this weekend. I don't know if there's a lot of spooning involved at the track. It just sounded good in my head when I said it, but anyway, I'm sure there's people out there who would want to do that. It would be terrifying, if I were a driver, especially one of the younger drivers, the under 21, or well, they're all over. No, not Lando and Stroll. Stroll over 21 yet? I don't know. I'll look at the program tomorrow and check out all their ages, even though I could Google them right now, but let's support the print. A lot of effort goes into printing these programs and everything, and I've got myself a nice collection here, so that'll be good to add to the pile. But yeah, I'm sure a lot of fans probably freak out drivers sometimes too, so if someone ever suggested to spoon a driver, I'm sure it'll be a flat out no. Let's take the conversation away from spooning though for now, because the dynamic about on track, what's going to happen between the two, because it got a bit frosty last year. One thing to look at as well in this, when looking at how the season's going to pan out, is that Leclerc is locked in long term now. He's got a long term deal under his belt. He will be the force that drives Ferrari forward in the future. Sebastian Vettel, on the other hand, can he do whatever he wants, basically, if this is to be his last season? I mean, it very well might not be, because, he might say, oh, well, I'm excited by the prospect of 2021 and all that, and I want to go around another year. But if Leclerc outperforms him again this year, then Vettel is going to have to spend 2021, if he stays at Ferrari, as number 2 driver. There's no possibility of them being on equal terms, especially if Leclerc has another good year like he did last year. I'm surprised that they're going to start this year in the same position as they did last year. But, if I was to put my hopes on a Ferrari title victory this year, it would have to be with Leclerc, because you saw his races last year, watching a few highlights again, him and Max going hammer to tong, at Silverstone in Austria. Well, not really Austria, because Charles pretty much, could have held the line a bit better, you could say in hindsight. But at Silverstone, it was basically like, I'm out for revenge, mate. There's going to be a bit of a vendetta happening here. So, and in the end, it all came to Leclerc's benefit. So, that's going to be one to watch out. But for Seb as well, if it is to be his last year and he's going to hang up the helmet or decide to go elsewhere, then he could totally do whatever he wants in that Ferrari this year. He could decide to ignore every team order until Matteo Binotto, decides to stick a needle under his tyre and force him to have a puncture, or, hits the self-destruct button on the automatic self-destruct button on the cockpit. So, it's all up in the air as far as that's concerned. But, we've often seen drivers, who might be on their way out or possibly even looking at retirement the next year. They might, decide to say, you know what, stuff it, I'm just going to go all out this year. And we might see some good races from Seb as a result too. So, we'll have to wait and see how things pan out. It's going to be too early at the moment to say for sure that that'll be the case. But, you never know. An off-season, whatever kind of an off-season that he's had, has Vettel could, remotivate him to come out this year and actually fight for the title like he was in the mix in 2017, he was in the mix 2018, but then basically for his own reasons and also team reasons, he wasn't able to sustain that title challenge. So that'll be a couple of things, as far as Ferrari to look out for. One name that I haven't mentioned just yet, and I will now go back and talk about him is... Sorry, a little bit of hiccups. Is Valtteri Bottas, can the biggest threat to... Or will the biggest threat to Lewis Hamilton's 7th world title this year come from within? Will Bottas 3.0 show up this year? Because 2.0 was great, first couple of races and then in the last part of the season. But where was he, from Barcelona onwards? So basically, what we're going to need to see is Bottas is basically he's going to need to up his game again, have as much porridge as he needs to be able to challenge Lewis. Lewis is... it's going to be hard to expose any cracks with him. He can't do what Rosberg did in 2016 and, get into that psychological warfare thing. That's not the way to beat Lewis. I think Lewis has learned from that as well from 2016. So this time... yeah, it's going to be all down on ability, basically, or even luck, luck is a big thing as well. 21 races, Hamilton might have some DNFs, some non-point scoring races through no fault of his own too. It could be Mercedes reliability that comes into play. So there's a lot to potentially influence and, influence what will happen in this championship. And I reckon too, this might not be the last we see the coronavirus impacted as well. So are we going to lose more races potentially, or possibility of the whole championship just being called off? Let's just do non-championship races, because Ross Brawn did say about a week ago that if one team wasn't able to race because of this, then, certainly it won't be a Formula One World Championship, or you won't have championship races for points. It would just be like basically going out to the movies and watching non-championship races. And, going out to the movies will be what you do in the Bahrain Grand Prix, because, no spectators and you'll basically just watch it on TV. So, Bottas to step up, Ferrari step up, Red Bull step up. They all need to step up. Otherwise, I think, Lewis has got the job done. You can give him his 7th title, not just yet. Let him win some races, assert his championship lead, and then we'll see come middle of the season how everyone stands. But, he's just such a consistent driver. And as much as you want to not look to the past or to the last year or whatever, as much as it is about eyes forward, you look at last year, his results and statistics, I think it was only 2 races or something that he finished outside the top 3. So one of them being Germany, and then Brazil, I think, was the other one. So he was the benchmark for consistency, and he can totally be the same again this year. Still on Red Bull, I guess. It'll be interesting to see what will happen for Alexander Albon too. He had a strong debut year last year, spent the second half of the season with Red Bull before being announced as the Red Bull driver for this year. But I think this year there will be a bit of pressure on him to be able to show those results, to get those podiums under his belt. I think nothing short of podiums will be what's the expectation. If Red Bull have a good enough car, we might even see Albon win a race this year. I don't think he'll be a championship contender, but if Red Bull are in a position where they can challenge for the Constructors' Championship, then they will need Albon to bring in the results. That's the problem that they had with Gasly last year. He basically couldn't get the best out of the car. He wasn't suited to the car, whereas Albon it fit like a glove, did the RB15 from last year. So this year will be a key year for Albon. He was quite mature, a bit quite unflappable as well. with the way he presented himself last year, the way he raced. So, if we can see more of that this year, I'm sure he will be mixing it with the big guns out the front and, getting on that podium too, which will be quite key. Calendar stuff now, and basically, as we've mentioned a million times already, no Chinese Grand Prix. It's been postponed due to the coronavirus, but I doubt that even though it's been postponed that we will see it feature this year. Possibility that even more races could be cancelled. I mean, we've got Bahrain happening behind closed doors, but then also the first trip for F1 to Hanoi as well for the Vietnamese Grand Prix in just under a month's time, actually. So even that, there's been word out of Vietnam for as far as, them basically knocking back visas for tourists as well coming from certain countries. A few fans that I know, a few friends who were hoping to go there for the race this year have had their visas knocked back from here, from Australia because of this. So, it's just, it's a situation that they're going to have to monitor closely. And depending on how this weekend goes, I think that's going to basically shape the rest of the championship. I mean, the next round, or the first round when we get back to continental Europe, will be the Dutch Grand Prix in May, first weekend of May, the return to Zandvoort, which everyone's looking forward to. I've seen some onboard videos of the track, with the new banking and everything, and also Max Verstappen running in an old Red Bull car around there. Looks phenomenal, looks fantastic, it looks like a whole bunch of fun. I can't wait to drive the track in the game when the F1 game comes out this year. But it's all up in the air as far as what's going to happen. Otherwise, the calendar's pretty much the same. There's no German Grand Prix this year, as you know. Second half of the season, there's a switch between Mexico and Texas because last year they swapped the two. So this year we'll have Austin GP before the Mexico Grand Prix, and then Brazil, Abu Dhabi to round out the season. So that's pretty key there. That's the calendar. Now, what is key, that's what I was supposed to say, is that the early part of the year will be key to getting on top of Mercedes, to be able to get some wins under your belt. If you are a title challenger this year, get some wins under the belt, get some consistency happening, and then just sustain that for the rest of the year, because that's what Mercedes do best, is they're consistent. Whether they don't have the fastest car or not, it's up to their drivers. The drivers get the result, the team get the result in the pit stops. Strategy is always key. They just make things work. So at the times even where we've seen them not being able to win the race on pace, or qualify at the front all the time or on pole position, they find a way to win. And that's because, it's basically they're better than their rivals in these other key areas, and that's where they've got to basically all step up. So that's that basically for the championship. Midfield, talked about it last week with the testing results. Racing Point at the moment looking like they might be on top, but again, it's one of those things where for the whole season, can they maintain that? Now they've got no problems as far as their financial security is concerned, so they should be able to inject upgrades into that car all throughout the season. The research and development should be able to go on, but also that keen eye on 2021 too. I mean, how many of the teams are going to not abandon what they're doing this year, but put more focus on their 21 project? That's going to be key too. And I think there's a lot of teams who basically will say, well, this whole last, not decade, but since the start of the hybrid turbo era, it's pretty much been a write-off for us because Mercedes have had the head start. We've not been able to catch up. So how many people are going to look to 21 and then decide to abandon what they're doing this year too? Renault and McLaren behind Racing Point at the moment, you could say. Renault revealed their car today, the livery, so, pretty much the same apart from the addition of a new title sponsor in DP World, but the dynamic between Daniel Ricciardo and Esteban Ocon will be critical because, Ocon's a guy who's been on the sidelines for a year and basically is hungry to I'm not going to say annoy another teammate, but basically, establish himself again. He and Renault have made it clear that this is not just some kind of loan deal or one-off loan deal that he's been brought over from Mercedes. He believes, or he's saying that he believes that he has a future with Renault and potentially taking them back to the top where they used to be. So where does that leave Mr. Ricciardo then? Well, he's going to be a big talking point this year because he's one of the key players off contract at the end of the year. Renault are going to have to do a lot of convincing to be able to keep him. So, when you look at guys like Hamilton, who's off contract, Vettel off contract, Bottas as well. Actually, 16 of the 14 drivers are off contract. Sorry, 16 of the 20 drivers are off contract at the end of the year. So there's going to be, or there's potential for a lot of shuffling to go on for 2021. Potential for drivers who are not in F1 at the moment to make a case to come in. You look at Mick Schumacher in F2, who's been talked about as potentially replacing Antonio Giovinazzi next year. Fernando Alonso's name is always mentioned. I don't know why. I just don't get why I can't just give up, now. Not that I don't think he's a great driver, but I think sometimes it's just when you go past it to just stop. I know the whole McLaren ordeal in his last few seasons wasn't ideal, but at the same time, which of the big teams will take him? Mercedes, who knows? Red Bull, probably not because of Honda, and then Ferrari. Do Ferrari want him back in the camp? He was probably one of the key reasons to Ferrari's problems heading into 2014, and then all the changes that we saw in their management. So, yeah, that's a key and curly one that I'm sure we'll talk about again later on in the season. So that's looking at, driver movement for potentially next year and how it'll influence this year. McLaren, though, I think they easily have what it takes to still beat Renault this year, even if Racing Point have skipped out in front. Sainz and Lando Norris, they were fantastic. I think they're going to hit the ground running again this year. I mean, Sainz had a slow start to last year. He had 3 DNFs in the first 3 races, so surely, if he had scored points in those races, his finishing position wouldn't have been any higher, but it would have been a lot stronger than it was, basically, because it came down to the last race to decide who was going to finish in that 6th position between him and the 2 Red Bull guys, Albon and Gasly, who was in the Toro Rosso at that time. So I think, they're going to have a good year, basically building on what they had last year. Surely they can't go backwards. They can't have botched it. They are a team with resources. Remember, it's the first year for James Key, first full year for James Key, and this is a James Key designed car. Andreas Seidel, first full year behind the team as team principal. Andreas Stella as the racing director too. So they've got a lot of key personnel there. Zach Brown, it's not much, it's not up to him much anymore. He's still there as the CEO of McLaren Racing, but he can take the back seat a little bit, because Seidel from last year, he did a fantastic job, and I guess now with the team pretty much his from this start of this year, I think we should see them grow even more, and 2021 is the target, I think, for McLaren to get back up there, to take that next step, reuniting with Mercedes with engine supply. So I think the dark days are hopefully behind them, touching wood again. Alfa Romeo, Alfa Tauri, I guess, some people say that they might be in their own world behind the likes of Racing Point, McLaren and Renault. Alfa Tauri probably more competitive, you could say, but Alfa Romeo seemed okay in testing. They were quick at times. They seemed really reliable. Kimi Raikkonen, even though this could be Kimi Raikkonen's last year in F1 too. I mean, you don't really talk about that much now because he's not with a top team anymore, but you'd like to see him get a few good results before he goes out, if it is to be his last year. He could totally decide, I'm going to do 2021 as well because I want to sample these new cars. Ground effect might be cool, so we'll see how they go out. Who it is a key season for is Haas, because last year it was a poor year. Gunther Steiner, team boss, has come out and already said, well, we don't want to make Netflix, we don't want to get on the Netflix show again for basically the wrong reasons, Kevin Magnussen slamming Gunther's door down or whatever and him chasing him through the paddock at Silverstone. they want to have a good year. And I guess Gene Haas has already come out and said that they're going to assess their future pretty early on this year to determine whether it's worth staying in F1 if, they're not going to really improve. So, money talks at the end of the day, and if he's not getting the results that he wants, then it might not be worth it for him to continue. So it would be really sad, though, given that, we don't want to see that happen. We want to have as many teams as possible, many competitive teams too, which I think is the key word. But, yeah, we want to basically have a good year for those guys so we see them continuing. And again, key year for Grosjean, key year for Magnussen. Grosjean, I think, will come under scrutiny a bit more, given that, he's the one who's caused, well, not trouble as much as he's not been delivering the results as much as they would have liked to. You saw Magnussen put in that awesome lap in Austria to get into the top 10. Then he had the penalty. Then in the race, it basically just fell apart for him because, of the tyre troubles that they were having. So that'll be a key thing to look at too. And then Williams too. Williams could be in a position to be ahead of Haas even because, they've made upgrades. They've come leaps and bounds from last year, just from their pace that they showed in testing and, what we saw from them being the first team on track, George Russell feeling like he can be scoring points this year, not maybe on a regular basis, but, semi-regular to be able to get some points on the board, get that prize money in the bank too. So going to be a key year for them. And also Nicholas Latifi too, how does he fit into the team? And, he's had a pretty good junior career. He didn't win the F2 championship last year. He was the runner-up. Those honours went to Nick de Vries, of course, who's racing Formula E for Mercedes, and he's doing quite well there at the moment. So for Latifi too, I think, this will be a character-building year in the Williams. And if he can score some points, that would be fantastic because all it's going to do is shore up his position for next year, and that's what you want as a rookie, to be able to secure your drive for next year, unless you are like a Lando Norris or George Russell, who just from the outset in their Formula One careers just show how amazing they are. So that'll be that. And Williams hopefully scoring points this year will be good too. But then, a lot of the off-track stuff, I think, will revolve, obviously now around coronavirus, but 2021 too, with the major change in regulations, technically, commercially as well. What are the commercial regulations going to look like? Liberty Media taking all sorts of flack at the moment because of how they're handling coronavirus and the fact that, some people think we shouldn't be racing this weekend or just cancel everything. Their stocks are going down, it's the end of the world, blah, blah, blah. And then even, this was kind of very weird. I'm not going to say left-wing because it's the opposite of left-wing altogether, but given that they've announced that they want to head to a carbon neutral or net zero carbon future, they've gone and announced a sponsorship deal with one of the biggest polluters on the earth, Aramco, which is a Saudi Arabian oil company, so they were, and that's factually true that they are one of the biggest. They were named last year as the biggest polluter in the world. So, whether that's going to be a new partnership to benefit both parties where, they invest heavily in research into biofuels and synthetic fuels, we'll just have to wait and see. But, hopefully this isn't something that, they've done just because they need a splash of cash or something because of the tough times. So there we go, 40 minutes in, and that's how long it took me to do a preview for the whole season. Or not even, we didn't even do it race by race, or just talking casually. So just goes to show you got a lot on my mind at the moment that I'd like to express to you guys. So thank you so much for listening. We're not done yet. We'll go straight into the Australian Grand Prix. So this weekend, I'd like to say that there's that buzz around the new season starting, the first day back at school thing. Maybe we'll see when we get to the track tomorrow, but I think the whole coronavirus thing has dampened the build-up, and we've seen already with the press releases and the announcements of drivers having limited engagement with fans. There won't be any spooning, there won't be any autographs, there won't be anything like that this year, which is a bit of a shame, of course. 3 team personnel have already self-quarantined. I think we're going to just have to be cautious every day. And that's up to me too to do my part. I've got to make sure that I am very hygienic at the track, make sure, I'm not touching things after sneezing or coughing, make sure I use a tissue to sneeze, or if not a tissue, just into my sleeve. Wash my hands every time I can, basically after handling anything. So, this comes down to the individuals as well, basically, to make sure that their hygiene's up to scratch. Because what is really annoying is there was someone who went into self-quarantine after rocking up at an... Just as I yawn, it's 20 past 9 here. It's recording this rather late. It's because I wanted to do it today instead of tomorrow when I normally record. A guy, basically, an elderly gentleman, basically rocking up to Albert Park Hotel there with a virus, and as a result, and that's because he came back from overseas and didn't follow protocol. So there's going to be people out there who are just either don't understand what's going on or just don't really give a hoot, and as a result are going to get other people sick. So going to have to be cautious each day about that. It's good, as I said, they've got, hand sanitizing stations all over the track. Well, I can't confirm firsthand, but, just from what I've read, that they've got that all over the track now. So the onus is on people too to make sure they do the right thing. And, I guess, whatever happens, happens. And I said, I'm, again, just basically slamming my desk, touching the chipboard that's there, touching the wood, that, everything goes okay and we don't get sick. So, yeah, that's that. As far as, on-track stuff is concerned, the big question is always how will pace from testing translate to racing in anger for the first time. Mercedes have been really strong around here since the turn of the hybrid era, 2014. The last 6 pole positions, basically since 2014, have been taken by Lewis Hamilton, and then altogether he's got 8 in total because of the 2 that he took with McLaren as well in the past. Though his conversion rate hasn't been too great. He's only had 2 wins at this venue. Last year, Valtteri Bottas won. A bit of a strategy problems for Lewis, and then Valtteri also getting a good start. So that's that. Red Bull, their first podium in the hybrid era came last year, so it took them long enough to get up on the podium in Australia because 2014 with Daniel Ricciardo doesn't count, thanks to their fuel flow irregularities or whatever. Maybe Ferrari was looking at that when they tried to put themselves in the same situation. They've had some good fortune in the last few years with Vettel winning back-to-back in 17 and 18. Again, this year, an unknown to how they're going to fare. So, for everyone's championship hopes, they've got to hit the ground running in Melbourne and, get on the podium, collect as much points as they can, win the race if they have to. Remember, fastest lap also gets you an extra point if you finish in the top 10 too. So there's another little quirk that they can rely on too. Not that it's going to make all too much difference. It will only if they take the championship down to the wire. So, but it's there if they need it. As far as running is concerned and everything, well, Friday there's a bit of a rain threat about for FP2 later in the day. So FP2 starts here at 4 o'clock local time, which is Australian Eastern time. So, yeah, there could be some rain about in the air. That could curtail running in FP2. But FP1, it should be nice and sunny, hopefully. It's going to be hot tomorrow, hot Friday, and then cool change kicks in Friday night. Then Saturday, Sunday are going to be relatively cool days, but the sun will be out, so that's exciting. It just will be exciting, FP1 on Friday, to see the cars roll out for the first time, hit the track in anger, and, away we go for another season. Racing Point, potentially an outside threat for the podium. That's basically what testing suggests. Can they be up there? Who knows? Renault, I've already talked about their livery. Daniel Ricciardo, he's taking measures to avoid burning out this weekend, which I guess normally happens to him on his home Grand Prix, and his results at home have not been fantastic. And then last year, running over that drain, like that's just, everything that could go worse. Everything that could go wrong went wrong for him last year, unfortunately. And it was funny actually seeing that they've taken measures this year to actually put concrete over that drain to make sure it doesn't get, no one hits it this year. So there were some photos of that being circulated around. So that was a bit of a thing on the track that they fixed this year. And also I just decided to throw in there, will there be more attention on Carlos Sainz this year? Because last year he didn't get very much TV time. It'd be nice to see a bit more of the McLaren on TV, especially Carlos Sainz, who did such a great job. Podium in Brazil, finished 6th in the Drivers' Championship overall, and, destined for great things. Destined for great things. But yeah, hard to say at this moment. Melbourne's a bit of an outlier when it comes to other tracks, so, you could easily be boring and say, oh yeah, Mercedes will win it. But, I'm sure we'll be in for a great race. Tyres similar to last year, there will be multiple pit stops, you think, potentially one depending on how tyre management is, but don't count out 2 or someone taking the gamble on 2 stoppers as well to see if they can get to the line first. So that's F1 done, quite a bit of content covered on this week's podcast, and just now it's on to the race weekend and see what comes of that. I'm sure there'll be plenty of storylines to talk about next week. But before I go off for this week, I will talk supercars as well just a little bit, because that is like the main support category this weekend, even though we do have Carrera Cup on the board, and it's going to feature Craig Lowndes actually. He's going to be doing a Carrera Cup appearance this weekend, TCR Australia and the S5000, which I did get to see at Sandown last year. They were exciting. S5000, I already said last week, we've got a few high-profile drivers actually contesting it. Rubens Barrichello, Giancarlo Fisichella, Jack Aitken, the Williams reserve driver. So sad there's no W2F1 branding on his S5000 car, but that's okay. James Davison as well, who's done S5000 before, and Thomas Randall too. As I talked about last week, fighting testicular cancer at the moment, and being given the green light to race. And then, of course, the next round of Super 2 in Tasmania as well in a few weeks' time. So good on him for that. And yeah, TCR Australia, those little pocket rockets, it will be exciting to see them. And see GRM on track for the first time this year, obviously, because they're not in supercars. So there's a revised format. I don't know if you guys are aware. I'll let you know. I'll go into the details, the nitty-gritty. Revised format for the supercars this weekend. So last couple of years since we had the championship round come online, we've had, 2 long-distance races, or like 25 lap races. They're not really long distance, but they had compulsory pit stops, and then 2 sprint races, 13 lappers, which were just sprints with no pit stops. They've revised that for this year, so they've got because I guess they've got lesser support categories than they did last year, because they had Formula 4, they also had Oz GT as well, and some other stuff happening. They've got 4 races still, but they're going to be 20-lap races with pit stops in there too. So, 5 laps less than what they were doing last year. So I think they're like 45, 50-minute races. They will have a pit stop involved too. 4 quickfire quali sessions to set the grid for all 4 of the races. That'll take place on Thursday or Friday, I think. Early Friday, or actually no, Thursday evening it usually takes place, to set the grids for all of the races. So, it's key to start as far up the front as you can, even though you might not have your car in the window early in the weekend. You're going to have to be able to get into quali spec, and then turn up for those races and have a good rest of the weekend. It's always, you see the cars go mental heading into turn 1. They fan out 4 or 5 cars wide. Then obviously the space decreases as further into turn 1, and then the exit of turn 2 you go that chicane. So They're a bit mental usually, but it's not going to be as crazy as Adelaide. It's not as grueling as a track as Adelaide. It's a bit more flowing, a lot of high speed corners, which is going to really test, I think, the aero balance as well that we saw over the off season. Ford dominated here last year with the Mustang. 4 wins out of 4, 3 out of 4 for Scott McLaughlin in the DGR Team Penske Mustang, and then Chaz Mostert, of course, winning the race that. McLaughlin got knocked out on the warm-up lap by Cameron Waters, so the front row taking each other out of the from the grid. So, they were the stronger car last year. They had the better aero, so this will be a real test now in the with the new aero specs to see who's on top. So, Triple Eight was strong in Adelaide. I said I wasn't hiding about it or mincing words. It was like, yep, they were quick in qualifying. Quick in the top 10 shootout, and then apart from what happened on Sunday with Shan Van Gisbergen and the pit stop drama, he would have won the race well ahead of Scott McLaughlin. So ball's in their court at the moment, even though Scotty's leading the championship. But at a circuit like this, where traditionally the Ford cars have done a bit better with their better aero, we might see them up there. But who knows? Another team to look out for: Walkinshaw Andretti United, of course, because I think Zach Brown's going to be on hand this weekend. Not sure about Michael Andretti. He'll probably be, because they've got the first IndyCar race as well this weekend in St. Petersburg. So I'm sure we won't see Michael Andretti. But yeah, Zach Brown, I'm not too sure if he's making the trip out to Australia. But strong showing from them in Adelaide. Chaz Mostert getting on the podium. He was strong, and this is the venue that they won last back in 2018. Scott Pye winning that quasi-night race, basically, because, the conditions were horrendous. I watched the replay of that, actually, the other day, and I was like, wow, they were really battling for grip, and it was just such a treacherous track at that time, and Scott managed to cross the line in the lead, beating Jamie Whincup by the narrowest of margins. So, yeah, last time that they won was back here, and quite interestingly, talking about Chaz Mostert, he is the last non-Triple Eight or DGR Team Penske driver to win as well, because after his win in Melbourne last year, there was just domination from those two teams for the rest of the season. So, whether that's going to change this weekend, because, in previous years we've seen 4 different winners from 4 races. That was in 2018. We've seen, all sorts of crazy stuff happen. It'll be a good little support round as always, but at the same time it does kind of steal the show at moments too over the rest of the competition, so, or like Formula One and all. So yeah, really excited to see what they do this weekend for supercars. I'm lucky that they made the announcement today about what's happening with Team Sydney. Otherwise I was just going to put a speculation question mark thing in there and say nothing's really been said about who's going to replace James Courtney, but that is no longer required because they've announced that Alex Davison will be driving for them full-time this year. They've got a new sponsor coming online as well, Beef Jerky. It doesn't say Beef Jerky on the side of the cars. I think is it Legends or Local Legends, something like that. But it's a jerky. It's a type of beef jerky. So having Beef Jerky sponsoring a car, in naming rights capacity, it's fantastic, I think. Unless you're a vegetarian or vegan, I don't think you'd appreciate that very much. Not that there's anything wrong with it, we've got to explore other areas, and more sustainable ways to eat. That's Lewis Hamilton's message. He will, I'm sure, be trying to communicate that, or he doesn't really during the race, at the track or anything, but, in his social media posts, he's very vocal about that sort of thing. And it was so nice to see him, at Wires Wildlife Rescue as well in New South Wales to actually firsthand check out all the devastation and check out the wildlife that survived the bushfires. Obviously Hamilton did make a very generous donation to the Red Cross and to Wires, as many drivers across the world, whether in Formula One or other categories in the world, have done. So, that was really touching. And yeah, seeing Lewis with the wildlife affected as well shows how much he cares about that thing. And I think, this weekend they are doing a few charities, a few little competitions. I think the Haas boys have got some gear that they are going to auction off. Same with Daniel Ricciardo as well with his race suits. So, even though they're not burning anymore, those fires, we're stuck in a toilet paper epidemic. The devastation is still being felt, and there was this whole thing. This is getting a bit off topic, but there was this whole thing, immediately after, when the donation started and everything, that people are coming out on social media and criticizing charities, blasting charities, saying, they're not actually putting 100% of the money to the actual to the bushfire affected areas. I mean, what's going on? They're not putting all the money in. It's like, well, you can't actually go into a town or a regional part of the country and literally just throw cash at everyone. There's a whole systematic way of doing it. It's not like the money is being withheld or like falsely donated or whatever. It's that it needs to be allocated to the specific resources. Like a whole community or a whole town. If it requires rebuilding, it's going to take years or months to years to be able to do that, and that money gets saved, while it might not be put to immediate use, it gets saved for future use, for projects, when they've got to rebuild things like schools or public areas, businesses and all that. That's money is kept for all that sort of thing. So the fact that some people just want to come out and blast the good work that other people are doing, it's just very upsetting. We all, everyone's done such a great job, I think. I mean, it's good to see the good side of humanity when we have tragedies like this and people do feel generous, they dig deep, and we get people like Lewis Hamilton in the world, using his influence and power for good, and that's great. And other drivers too who, auctioning off pieces of gear, donating money, making cash donations. It's just really heartening to see. And, that's, they get criticised. Oh, yeah, you're like celebrities. You basically live in your own bubble. At the end of the day, we're all human. It doesn't matter. Some people, they're like celebrities or they want to live that kind of life where I'm better than you, you're a bottom feeder, blah, blah, blah. It makes no difference. We're all flesh and blood at the end of the day. If I stand opposite to you, I mean, what's the difference between us apart from bank balance and, social status? Nothing. So, it's just these material things that sometimes do give me get me a little bit worked up. But, I'm going to save that spiel, not going to talk about it on this podcast. But yeah, that's pretty much it then. But hope everyone takes care though, with what's going on in the world. If you've got travel plans, of course, just look into it, reassess if you have to. I know I'm going to have to talk to the travel agent next week and find out what my options are as far as my own travel plans for later in this year are concerned. And then for the Grand Prix too. If anyone's attending, hope you stay safe, stay hygiene, keep up the hygiene or whatever, and we'll be back hopefully this time next week to talk about what happened at the Australian Grand Prix, and hopefully it is stuff on track I'm talking about and some positive stuff rather than the fact that there was a lack of toilet paper or something. Anyway, guys, take care. Enjoy. Remember, follow me on Hit the Apex Media on Twitter to be able to keep up to date with what I'm doing at the Grand Prix. And, of course, if you follow me on my personal Instagram as well, you can have a look at some of the photos and the Insta stories that I put up. So, thanks. Take care and catch you next time.